Hey everyone, welcome to Terror Talk. Welcome. Kathy's got a very famous horror director to talk about today.
I like this guy. And not only do I like his stuff, but everything that I've seen, like interviews, and then I was an extra way back in the day on the original Spider-Man, not the original, but original in my generation with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. And so I was able to be on set and watch him direct and interact. And we're both from Michigan, so there's that.
There's that connection.
But Sam Raimi.
Yeah. I'm excited. I'm excited to hear about it. I like this series because I don't really know too much about them. Like, obviously, I know these horror directors like bigger movies, but this is fun for us all to learn a little bit more about them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all of us horror files know a lot about like their most famous films, and we know little things about them. But it's been fun for me too because there's all these additional pieces. Like in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking about John Carpenter, and he's another favorite.
Yeah,
and I'm learning a lot of really fun things. Yeah, just dissecting this.
So fun.
If those of you don't know him as well, or do and maybe don't know some of these things, just kind of want to revisit, first of all, just his CV, if you will.
Okay. As a businessman.
As a businessman, he is. So he's obviously well known for the Evil Dead series.
Right.
And then, as I just noted a moment ago, the Spider-Man trilogy from 2002. And the Spider-Man trilogy actually became the first film to gross over $100 million in a single weekend.
Wow.
Yeah. I remember when it came out too, it was such a big deal and people were really excited for Spider-Man to like become a thing again.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of hype around it, but then he made it really fun.
He did.
2 and 3 were okay, but the first one was really fun.
The first one was, better.
And then a film that I watched that I had only seen pieces of in the past that I really enjoyed, Darkman. Have you seen Darkman with
probably
Liam Neeson?
Maybe not.
And I'm dropping her name right now, from Fargo, married to the Coen brother, Raising Arizona. I keep wanting to say Florence Pugh, but it's not Florence Pugh. Everybody who's listening to this is like, it's Frances McDormand. Thank you. It's Frances McDormand. I don't know. That just came to me. Like I yelled it myself and it popped up. So that is a really fun one that I rewatched, and really great role for her. But it was a great movie for its time as far as special effects and things like that.
Sure.
Then we know he did A Simple Plan, which was an excellent movie. Not a horror movie, but definitely a thriller. And then a couple other ones that were not unrelated to the horror genre, but that I still really liked was the unfavorite, Quick and the Dead. I loved that movie. Young Leonardo DiCaprio, Sharon Stone, Gene Hackman. If you haven't seen it, it's a fun Western.
Yeah, you're one of the few, right, that like that movie. Although I'm sure it has a cult audience.
Well, I think as an aside, I also loved the movie Bad Girls that came out around the same time. And I think it's because so many Westerns didn't really have female characters. Yeah. And so between Quick and the Dead, I think it was Cowboy Blues with Uma Thurman. I think that's what it was called. And then Bad Girls, it was like there was a time in the 90s.
The representation
of Westerns, and not just as in these passive characters, but these really badass like sheriffs and
like people you wanted to be.
Yeah, that's right. And probably the hottest Drew Barrymore's ever looked in a movie, in my opinion, in Bad Girls. Yeah. And then I loved the movie For the Love of the Game. That was a baseball movie. And being from Detroit, I love that he made it the Detroit Tigers. And Kevin Costner played a pitcher in that movie. And Kelly Preston was the love interest in that.
Oh my gosh. So, that's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Rest in peace. And then Raimi co-wrote the Coen brothers comedy, The Hudsucker Proxy, which was 1994. So he's done a lot. He has stayed in, I think he's best known for horror, but he's also done a lot of really fun action adventure stuff, thriller stuff. And then he's also done a lot of TV. Right. So in 1994, he created his first TV series, Mantis. I never watched it, but I do remember when it came out. It was on Fox. I think it only lasted 2 seasons. 94 to 95, about a paralyzed doctor who becomes a superhero when assisted by a powered exoskeleton, was envisioned as a filmed comic book, but didn't make an impression with audiences. And it was canceled after 1 season. And then next year he created the hit show, which a lot of people don't know this. He did Xena, Warrior Princess, which was in syndication from 1995 to 2001. And I know this, you loved this. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, Lucy Lawless.
I mean,
Yeah. Come on.
good man.
So, some people don't know that was his too. And so he didn't direct anything. He didn't direct any until 2014. But when he helmed the pilot for Rake, which I only watched a few episodes of that first season with Greg Kinnear. And it was hilarious. He was an attorney and he was always getting into shit. Like the guy had a bad day every single day.
I don't know that I watched. I mean, I may have watched an episode or two, but I don't remember it.
He was one of those characters where you loved him and hated him all at the same time, right? And then in 2015, he directed the pilot for Ash vs. Evil Dead, which appeared on Starz from 2015 to 2018. And he executive produced with Robert Tapert and starring his buddy Bruce Campbell. So he's done a lot. And I think he's really known too for just a lot of the cult following of things. You know, many people will have heard of Evil Dead and Ash versus Evil Dead, but there's a large community who have never watched these, but they still know what it is and who it is.
Right.
Sam Raimi and I were both born in October in Royal Oak, Michigan. I just want to start by saying that.
He's your homie.
Yeah, he's my homie, but he was born in 1959, and let's just say I was not.
Yeah, let's just go with that.
We know he was an American film and television director, producer, screenwriter, and one thing I'll talk about in a bit is this inventive camera techniques that he would use to capture the audience even more so and make these really like kind of the way that he films things almost like pulls people into the screen. This was well before, technology in horror was the way that it was. He just knew how to use the camera in a way. It was almost like it was another limb for this guy. And he also really knew how to combine all of that with humor in the horror genre, which a lot of people attempt, but do unsuccessfully.
Right.
And
that's for sure.
All you have to do is watch Evil Dead.
Right.
Army of Darkness.
The OG.
The OGs. And he does that quite well. So born in a suburb of Detroit, Michigan, Royal Oak, Michigan. It's a cool, really downtown artsy district. He started to make movies with Bruce Campbell and some of his other friends when they were just like probably early high school or late middle. They were in their teens. And as we know, the two, Bruce and Sam, would continue on to collaborate repeatedly and really have done that beautifully over the span of their careers, which I think is pretty remarkable because they both have become pretty famous, and sometimes that doesn't work after a while.
That's right.
And they have a really good Midwestern friendship foundation. I think that certainly helps. And like he said, Detroit was a great place to grow up, and I concur. So he didn't really begin as a master of horror and depravity. He liked other genres. He was the youngest of 5 children, and he was actually raised in a very conservative Jewish family in Birmingham, Michigan, which is a pretty wealthy suburb of Detroit. And Birmingham is kind of known for having really, really great private schools. People are like middle upper class. And there's just, what's the word I'm looking for?
Privilege?
There's privilege. And there's a word I'm not finding right now, but that is okay. Yes, there's a lot of privilege there. And just a lot of history in the city of Birmingham.
Oh, gotcha.
So Sam, he really had this idyllic suburban childhood in the outskirts of Detroit. And as someone who grew up as well in Oakland County, which is part of that, it was a really fun way to grow up. And I know also just growing up in the 70s and 80s and early 90s in general, those of us who grew up in the suburbs, we were encouraged and loved using our imagination. And that's where, they were out all day just messing around and filming things and using their imagination.
Yeah,
and
we all were.
We all were. And the outskirts of Detroit, because a lot of people don't know Michigan. They think Detroit, they're like, ooh. The outskirts of Detroit are incredibly safe.
Gotcha.
So you would leave, like if you grew up in like Oakland or Macomb County, you would, leave in the morning and not come back till night. It wasn't like living in downtown Detroit.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. I know exactly like what he means about how easy it was to just start filming at that time.
And it wasn't odd. Like everybody was kind of doing it for fun.
Spielberg was doing it. Everybody, and Spielberg, was really he created this space where a lot of kids would start doing it because they knew that's when he started. When he was a kid.
And I also think then too, it's like for those of us who didn't become, mega directors or anything, it was just a thing you did as a kid to have fun.
That's right.
You took pictures, you did videos, you made a bunch of slop. Like most of us didn't really want to become filmmakers, but like it was a thing we did for fun.
Like we would use our our cameras and go around and take pictures.
Oh my God, the amount of pictures I took. Lord.
Do you remember when those disposable underwater cameras came out?
Yes.
I was like a fish all summer because I thought that was the coolest thing ever.
Worst pictures ever.
The worst.
Like just like seas of blue.
Yeah. They got more sophisticated.
They did.
But, yeah.
You had to practice.
And then you just shh to get to the next.
I know. And you're spending all this money getting them developed.
That's right.
You're so excited.
I'll read this last little part and then we're going to do some horror facts. So according to an article by David Crow, Sam Raimi, called A Retrospective, this kid always viewed the world with a peculiar screwball sense of humor and a tongue firmly planted in his cheek. When his father and brother Ivan brought home a Super 8 film camera one day, Sam became fascinated with how he could manipulate this with the new toy. Already a child magician, filming seemed like the natural next step to Raimi in his mastery of illusion. Mm-hmm. Shall we, Shannon?
Yeah. Is it time?
Raimi facts with Cav.
Okay, I'm ready.
Number 1.
Yeah.
Evil Dead was based on a short film by Raimi called Blank.
Okay.
Number 2. The classic Oldsmobile featured in Evil Dead 1 and 2 is Raimi's college car. In what other film did the director use his car as a cameo? Number 3. This Oscar-winning filmmaker got his start as an assistant editor on The Evil Dead. Number 4. Directed by Sam Raimi and released in 1998, this film explores the dark and twisted consequences that arise from a seemingly innocent decision.
I might know that one.
Yeah, I think you do. And number 5, what scene in Evil Dead does Sam Raimi have the most regret and would have left out if made today?
All right. We'll get those answers at the end and we'll see all the things I don't know.
Sounds good. We talked a little bit about his childhood, but then also just his younger life, going to Michigan State and starting to play around with film a little bit more seriously. And he, as I noted, he started experimenting with filmmaking at a really early age. And by his teen years, he was already an active member of a circle of amateur actors and directors in the Detroit area. And again, for folks who don't know, we don't talk about Michigan or the Detroit area often as like a film spot, but there's actually a lot of independent film festivals there.
Okay,
and
cool. Well, it's cold.
It's cold. And I think that, to be quite honest, I think Sam and Bruce are a big reason for that. I filmed a horror short at Michigan State like 30 years ago, and we entered it in to the festival that Bruce was running, and that was fun because he said our film name at intermission. He came out and he goes, "Something smells like zombie." And to us, we're like, we just won.
I mean, as
everyone else hated
kids.
it, but we just won. Yeah, because it was like an art. It was weird. It was an art festival. It wasn't even all horror, so the horror people loved it, and everybody else is like, "What is this disgusting?"
Where are the
madness?"
zombies?
He loved it.
Of course, he did.
He did. Among this group, obviously, was Bruce Campbell, and then also his brother Ted, who became staples in a lot of his productions. In 1977, he enrolled at Michigan State, and he started to produce. He produced the 8mm films, The Happy Valley Kid, and It's Murder. And I'll discuss these in a little bit when I talk about Evil Dead. So these modest efforts to make these films provided Sam with a lot of really great experience and helped him and Bruce and Ted. And so they moved on to this next project, the short film called Within the Woods that came out in 1978. And it served as the test reel for what is arguably Raimi's most famous work, which is The Evil Dead, 1981. So it's low budget. is very low budget, and this was very apparent. And the level of gore, the way they describe it in this article was like bordered on cartoonish. And if you watch The Evil Dead, that's very true. But it's also, I think, what makes it incredibly endearing. And I think that because there's a lot of humor, it worked. And it's become one of the most influential horror films of all time. So I talked about this camera thing that he did, and he used what we call a shaky cam. He loved using handheld camera technique. He loved using handheld camera techniques. And what's funny is I've worked with a few independent film directors in Detroit who really are like, you know, such fans of his, and they to this day are like, I'm only using handheld, right? Because it's like such a thing.
Good luck with it.
For, yeah. And so, you know, it was intended to replicate the POV of the given character. And this became widely emulated. And also, I think, I don't think it's an homage. I don't think he was doing it intentionally, but it definitely was a throwback to some earlier slashers where that's kind of what you would see. Giallo did that a little bit.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. So although his next film, Crime Wave in 1985, was hobbled when studio executives fundamentally altered the story with, you know, we love those editorial cuts.
Oh, yes.
It was written by Joel and Ethan Coen and began an association between Raimi and these two. And that ended up becoming a really great relationship and a really beneficial relationship. And the cult success of Evil Dead led the producer Dino De Laurentiis to fund the sequel, Evil Dead 2, which some people argue isn't a sequel. That's a whole other conversation. With Campbell returning and adding more of that campy slapstick, I think that they really knew in number 2, like, okay, we may have tried to start serious in the first one, but we just have to embrace that this is silly as hell.
Right.
And then from there, Raimi started to gain a lot more confidence, and he experimented with the superhero genre and the comic book stuff that led to Darkman before completing the Evil Dead trilogy with Army of Darkness in 1992. So in Darkman in 1990, and then he came back and finished the trilogy in 1992 with Army of Darkness, which is a lot of fun. So he experienced his greatest box office success with a trio of films that I mentioned this earlier on in our episode where, you know, clearly he had already had an interest in comic book adaptations. Darkman, and I remember when there was word that he was going to direct Spiderman, and I was so excited about that because, like, he's so creative and he can take something that isn't even horror and just make it so much fun. And he did. The first one was a lot of fun. It came out in 2002. And then the second one, 2004, and then the third one, 2007. And it grossed roughly $2.5 billion worldwide, all three. And all three of them featured Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson. And like I had noted, I met him on the first one. I met Tobey too, but I met Sam, and he just seemed like a real Midwest nice dude. Yeah. So David Crow, who I was talking about earlier, who's a writer, and he states from Den of Geeks, he says, when you meet Sam Raimi, you are likely to think he is the most charmingly sweet man in the world. He is bound by an old school professionalism that dictates he wear a suit and probably a fedora. His mild-mannered smile gives off the vibe of an unassuming everyman with those storied Midwest values. Even his hair, which is usually swept to the side, is just unkempt enough to suggest a bit of quirky personality, but nothing out of the ordinary. And I would concur.
Yeah.
Another thing that Raimi did is he went to school to learn about 3D because he really figured, like, okay, people are starting to use this shit. I should probably figure it out. And he found it incredibly frustrating and tedious, partially because he was such a perfectionist and it's already such a difficult thing to do well. Yeah. His big thing is, I want to make sure that it's a pleasant experience for the audience, because oftentimes 3D isn't, and people will walk out and they're like, I have a headache. That was horrible. And he didn't want that. And this is something he talks about quite a bit. He cares about the cinema experience for the audience. He emphasizes how important it is for them to have a good time. And this may seem obvious, but some directors really don't care. They don't think about it. They just want to be praised for their art or how out there they are. So he's kind of like a Spielberg of horror films, where I think Spielberg once said, I'm a cinemaniac and I don't apologize for making popcorn films,
Right.
And one comment I saw that Sam Raimi said, that David Crow said, is Sam Raimi has such a respect for his audience. And I think this is something that makes him incredibly likable. I think a lot of people, even if you haven't met him and you've just watched interviews and you see his movies, I think most people would agree.
Yeah.
So Raimi says, a direct quote, I'm not concerned if people like me or not so much. I really want them to like the movie. That's what I'm concerned about. If they like this movie, then I'm happy. He also said the worst thing a filmmaker can do is make a boring picture. If you make a boring picture, you've not only failed, you've committed a crime.
Drama.
So he learned how to direct better by also learning how to act, which he found to be really, really hard. And I think that a lot of actors appreciated that because he's like, director can get in there and do all these, I want you to do this. And the actor's like, how would you like me to do that? So he found inspiration as well as where and how to posture himself. And he learned how difficult it was for actors when they didn't have good directors. I know you've worked on sets before. Can you speak to that at all? Or...
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a director that understands how hard the work is, it makes it impossible because then it's just becomes, we've heard a lot of stories about these really big directors that don't really care about how you're doing as an actor on the set. So it's really better when it's collaborative, which I think a lot of, I would say contemporary directors certainly, but it sounds to me like Sam Raimi was probably ahead of his time in that way where... it mattered. The collaboration mattered, and you can't really have a healthy collaboration if you don't respect that person's work.
That's right.
I know that happens a lot with contemporary directors, and I'm learning that it was happening back in the day as well, and that's the forerunners of this. But it's widely known that directors taking acting classes is a really important piece of the learning process, and that's why a lot of film schools will have that as part of the curriculum. And of course the directors are mortified because they want to be behind the camera and they're introverts or whatever. But it's really important to know what it's like to be in front of the camera and how hard to be natural in front of the camera, how hard that is.
Absolutely. And a lot of them also go on to get degrees in psychology too, directors, right?
As they should.
As they should. Thank you for that. The last thing I really want to talk about before we get to our answers is really how he came to make The Evil Dead and some of the things that were fun about this film. So he had just finished The Happy Valley Kid, which was the Super 8 college film that sparked Evil Dead to life. And this information is from an article called How Sam Raimi Made a Splatter Masterpiece by Andrew Saladino. The Murder was another film that preceded The Happy Valley Kid, and it was a short film that had a really good scare. And Raimi watched how the audience responded to that scare, which was really the key point in his career where he changed his focus from comedy to horror. He is so focused on wanting to make the experience pleasant for the audience that he was like, that was fun. I want to do more of that, which I think is cool.
That is cool.
And so this was at a time in the 1970s where it was like the gorier, the better, right? Torture porn and the whole thing. He takes part of the script from this short for Evil Dead to make a short to show anyone who might fund it. And then he and Bruce, they were like, we're not even going to go to California. That is such a large pond. They were in Michigan and California was 3,000 miles away. And so in the minds of Sam, Bruce, and Rob, they were better off going, hey, we're going to stay here. We're going to be bigger fish in a little pond. And if they went to Hollywood, they'd have to compete with every other dropout filmmaker. But in Michigan, they could single-handedly raise the money for a feature-length film and reap the benefits. And they did. They were actually eventually able to raise $85,000, which at that time was a lot for college students. So in 1979, when Sam Raimi made The Evil Dead, he couldn't even legally buy a beer. He was 20 years old, and he mustered a gaggle of friends, who he also called suckers, and made his way into the woods of Tennessee in the dead of winter to a bare bones cabin coated in cow manure. This is kind of funny and gross. So in the very last minute, they had to find a new cabin due to issues with the shoot. And they're like, we're not gonna be able to do this. Let's go see if there's anything else on this property. And the place was so dilapidated, and I guess a few murders had allegedly occurred already in this place. So imagine this energy. And as a horror director, he's probably like, "This is perfect.
Yeah, this is just the vibe I was looking for."
We're looking for. So they spent some time cleaning the cabin so it was at least bearable. But the conditions remained pretty poor and difficult throughout. And the temperature was 0 degrees.
Oh, my.
And Raimi was someone like myself who could not stand the cold, which is funny, both being from Michigan, stating at one point that he went outside to die and his friends covered him with a blanket. He's like, "I'm done. I'm going outside to die." And his friends are like, "Here's a blanket for you, bro."
So drama.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who knew he was so dramatic?
Who knew? So it took 12 weeks to make, and they went way over budget. But at the same time, they had talent to go for, miles with very little budget. Yeah. And the film's biggest technical achievement was its pioneering of the force camera movement, which is the shaky and steady cam hybrid that I was talking about. And what he did is he mounted the camera on a 2x4 wooden board in his hands, and he quickly ran through the woods, creating an unnaturally smooth, free roaming image. I mean, listen, they used it in Blair Witch.
Yeah.
Right? It's effective. Yeah, it was like, unburdened by unsteady hands or dolly tracks. Add a demonic sound effect. You have a force from the darkest depths of hell coming to swallow Bruce Campbell's soul. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
The use of mirrors, scattershot, amateur makeup, it all worked.
Yeah.
The use of comedy and horror are both exaggerated circumstances, and they are connected both rooted in exaggerated and rooted in absurdity. Okay. So Raimi was working around the clock for 24/7, and he ended up passing out on set. And the cast and crew, as a perfectionist would, cast and crew threw a bucket of ice cold water on him, just waited around to get him to wake up. And then they're like, "All right, let's keep going."
Back at it, sir.
So lastly, by December, most of the crew left. Oh. They're like, "Okay,
bye.
This is taking forever," and only 5 were left to shoot part 3. So one of the cast members left, positioning the producer to put the costume on. They used unused furniture to burn and keep warm. Production continued to shoot sporadically throughout the year and finished in the summertime. And a full year of post-production, $375,000 later, they premiered in Detroit.
Yeah.
And many people believe that his success was based on how forced he was in using his common sense to finish his special effects, such as, how do I make someone float? Like, he's like, "I guess I have to figure this out." And he figured it out, and he didn't let the horrible conditions, the people leaving, the over budget stop his project. He just, and Campbell didn't leave his side. He's like, I have no choice but to do this.
You have to be relentless.
You do.
When you're young, and you can be.
Yeah. Other than our answers, this is a cool story. They went through hell making that movie.
Yeah, there's a lot to read about that. They've done like documentaries and interviews. They do panels at horror conventions.
That's the Cliff's Notes.
Yeah, they talk about a lot of this. So if you have never investigated that, Evil Dead's kind of one of the things that's in your, we all have blind spots in the horror world, and there's no shame in that. Sometimes it's a really popular thing. I didn't really get into watching these movies till COVID, and then I went down a rabbit hole of watching all of these and kind of learning about them. And I attended a panel with them, and, Bruce Campbell, I attended COVID things with Bruce Campbell that he was doing online. So I just sort of have more information about it now in my head, just how it was for them. And it's really interesting. So if you're into that, it's a really cool, it's a cool little story. But for now, we're going to, do a little do some answers.
Evil Dead was based on a short film by Raimi called Blank. If Shannon was listening, she knows.
I think you said it or something. Is it like something woods or something?
Yeah, Within the Woods.
Okay, thank you. I know you said it, but I'm like, oh, shit.
The classic Oldsmobile featured in Evil Dead 1 and 2 is Raimi's college car. And what other film did the director use his car as a cameo?
In Evil Dead? I don't know.
He used it in Spiderman. It was Uncle Ben's car that sat on like the driveway. He just parked it.
That's fun.
Yeah. Number 3, this Oscar-winning filmmaker got his start as an assistant editor on The Evil Dead.
Well, I think you actually alluded to it.
Did.
It's a Coen.
Joel Coen.
One of the Coen brothers.
That's correct. And then they ended up working a lot together. Directed by Sam Raimi, released in 1998, this film explores the dark and twisted consequence that arise from a seemingly innocent decision.
A very underrated film, in my opinion.
Agreed.
Simple plan.
Correct. And it was a great movie. And then lastly, what scene in Evil Dead does Sam Raimi have the most regret and would have left out if made today?
The sexual assault with a plant one.
Yeah, Cheryl getting raped by the woods.
There you go. Mm-hmm. It's all about the woods. Short film was the woods.
He felt, and I think a lot of people also felt this too, and he admitted like it took a really weird turn that didn't match the temperature of the rest of the movie, and he felt it was exploitative in a way that he never would do that to a female character now.
Yeah, and that's how our sensibilities change.
Yeah.
And also, first film, they weren't even expecting it to go anywhere.
No.
I mean, anybody who's making their first film when they're 20 or whatever does not expect it to be the cult classic that it is now.
You're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders for the next 50 years of filmmaking.
You must answer for all of your decisions at the age of 20. So anyway, thank you so much for that, Kathy. I appreciate it, learning about these folks. And there's some more coming your guys' way. So thank you so much for listening. This has been an episode of Terror Talk. My name is Shannon.
And I'm Kathy. Sleep safe, everyone.